They say money can't buy happiness, but for Sarah Matthews, a struggling single mother from Tulsa, Oklahoma, $1 million represented something far more precious than wealth. It meant survival. At 67 years old, she never imagined she'd find herself in the middle of an international scandal that would challenge everything she believed about love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. This is the story of an impossible proposition, an unlikely romance, and of the grandmother's courage that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone she held dear. What began as a business arrangement in the gleaming towers of Dubai would become a journey of the heart that spanned 2 continents and bridged 2 vastly different worlds. Sometimes the most extraordinary chapters of our lives are written when we least expect them, and sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places. Sarah's arthritic fingers trembled as she held the eviction notice, the harsh fluorescent light of her tiny apartment kitchen making the red letters seem even more menacing. After 40 years as a nurse, her pension had proven woefully inadequate, especially after her daughter Monica's tragic car accident had left her grandson Timothy in Sarah's care. The 8-year-old boy was her entire world now, but love couldn't pay the mounting medical bills from his mother's final days, couldn't cover the rent, couldn't put food on the table. She had exactly $17 in her checking account and 3 days until they'd be on the street. The walls of her modest home seemed to close in around her, decorated with faded photographs of happier times. Her late husband James in his army uniform, Monica's high school graduation, Timothy's first day of kindergarten. Each image was a reminder of what she was fighting for, but also of how far she'd fallen. The email appeared in her inbox at 11:47 p.m. that fateful Tuesday evening. Sarah had been scrolling through online job postings, desperately seeking any opportunity that might hire someone her age, when the message caught her eye. The subject line read, "Unique opportunity for mature American woman. Compensation $1,000." Her first instinct was to delete it as spam, but something made her pause. The sender was listed as Khalid Al-Rahman, CEO, Al-Rahman International Holdings. Against her better judgment, she clicked it open. The message was professionally written, outlining an extraordinary proposal. The sender, a wealthy Arab businessman, was seeking an American woman of good character to serve as a surrogate grandmother figure for his family. The compensation was real, the terms were clear, and there was a phone number for verification. Sarah's heart raced. It seemed too good to be true, yet something in the formal, respectful tone of the message felt genuine. For 3 sleepless nights, Sarah wrestled with the decision. She researched Khalid Al-Rahman obsessively, discovering he was indeed a legitimate businessman, a 45-year-old Emirati billionaire who'd made his fortune in sustainable energy and technology. News articles showed a handsome man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, often photographed at charity events and humanitarian conferences. He'd lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier and had a daughter who'd been raising her own child alone after a divorce. The more Sarah learned, the more intrigued she became. On the 4th morning, with the eviction deadline looming just hours away, she picked up the phone with shaking hands and dialed the international number. A smooth, warm voice answered in perfect English with just a hint of an accent. "Mrs. Matthews, I've been hoping you would call. Let me tell you about my family and why I believe you might be exactly the blessing we've been praying for." That conversation would last 2 hours and change the trajectory of Sarah's entire life. Khalid's story poured through the phone line like water in a desert, quenching Sarah's doubts with its sincerity. His daughter Layla, a 32-year-old architect, had given birth to a son, Hassan, just 18 months ago, but the pregnancy had left her with severe health complications. Doctors had warned that another pregnancy could be life-threatening, yet Layla desperately wanted Hassan to have a sibling, to not grow up alone as she had. In their culture, family was everything, and the idea of an only child carried a particular sadness. Traditional surrogacy had proven problematic due to legal complexities in the UAE, and Layla's ex-husband had complicated matters further by refusing to be involved in any capacity. Khalid's voice grew thick with emotion as he explained how he'd watched his daughter's spirit dim, how the vibrant woman who'd once designed award-winning buildings now barely left her home, consumed by depression and the feeling that she'd failed her son. "Mrs. Matthews," Khalid continued, his words measured and respectful, "I know this must sound highly unusual to you. In my research, I looked for someone with your specific qualities: maturity, life experience, proven motherhood, medical background, and most importantly, a good heart that has known both joy and sorrow. My proposal is not what your email subject line might have suggested. I'm not seeking a surrogate to carry a child. Those arrangements carry their own challenges. What I'm proposing is something altogether different." Sarah listened with growing curiosity as he explained his plan. He wanted to bring Sarah to Dubai for 6 months, all expenses paid, to live with his family and provide what he called grandmother wisdom to Layla. His daughter needed emotional healing, guidance on parenting, and the kind of maternal support that only someone who'd walked the same path could provide. The $1 million would be hers, regardless of the outcome, a gesture of faith and gratitude. But there was one additional element to the arrangement that made Sarah catch her breath. Khalid explained that in their extended family there was a distant cousin, Amira, who was willing to serve as a surrogate, but was terrified of the medical procedures and needed extensive emotional support throughout the process. Sarah's nursing background and warm nature would be invaluable in helping Amira through the pregnancy journey. "I'm not asking you to do anything medical," Khalid clarified. "We have the finest doctors in the world here. I'm asking you to do what you've done your whole life: care for people, comfort them, guide them with your experience and wisdom. My daughter needs a mother figure. Amira needs a friend, and my grandson Hassan needs the kind of grandmother's love that transcends blood." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. This man, a billionaire from a culture so different from her own, was offering her not just money, but purpose, the chance to do what she did best, to matter again in a way she hadn't since Monica's death. The next 48 hours passed in a whirlwind that left Sarah breathless. Khalid's lawyers contacted her, providing contracts that were reviewed by a pro bono legal aid service in Tulsa, who confirmed everything was legitimate and heavily weighted in Sarah's favor. The agreement included a $50,000 advance payment before she even left American soil, enough to cover all her debts and secure Timothy's care. Her neighbor Gladys, a retired teacher who'd known the family for 20 years, agreed to become Timothy's temporary guardian, thrilled at the prospect and touched by the generous stipend Khalid was providing for the boy's care. Timothy, bless his resilient heart, was excited about his grandma's adventure and the promise of video calls every single day. Sarah spent her last evening in America packing her modest suitcase, including photographs of her loved ones, her worn Bible, and James's old baseball cap, small pieces of home to carry across the world. The first-class flight to Dubai was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She'd flown exactly twice in her life, once to California for her honeymoon in 1978, and once to Washington, D.C. when Monica had won a school trip. Now she reclined in a private pod with flight attendants who treated her like royalty, serving meals on china plates and addressing her as Madam Matthews. She couldn't sleep despite the lie-flat bed, her mind racing with equal parts excitement and terror. What was she doing at 67, flying to a foreign country to live with strangers whose language she didn't speak, whose customs she didn't know, whose very way of life was alien to everything she'd experienced in her 6 decades in Oklahoma? Yet somewhere beneath the fear was a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Adventure, possibility, the sense that her story wasn't over yet, that perhaps the best chapters were still to be written. Dubai International Airport was a cathedral of glass and marble, impossibly modern and teeming with people from every nation on earth. Sarah emerged from customs overwhelmed and disoriented, searching the sea of faces for someone holding a sign with her name. Instead, she spotted a tall, distinguished man in an impeccably tailored suit, his face familiar from her internet research, but somehow warmer in person, walking directly toward her with a genuine smile. "Mrs. Matthews, welcome to Dubai," Khalid Al-Rahman said in that same warm voice from the phone, his handshake firm but gentle. "Thank you for your courage in coming. My family and I are deeply grateful." Beside him stood a beautiful young woman in an elegant turquoise dress and matching hijab, her eyes red-rimmed but hopeful. "This is my daughter, Layla," Khalid continued. The young woman stepped forward and, to Sarah's surprise, embraced her tightly, whispering in slightly accented English, "Thank you for coming. You don't know how much hope you've brought to our home." The drive from the airport to Khalid's residence took Sarah through a city that seemed pulled from a science fiction novel. Skyscrapers pierced the clouds like crystalline needles, their facades glittering in the Arabian sun. The famous Burj Khalifa dominated the skyline, so tall it seemed to defy physics itself. Palm-shaped islands stretched into the impossibly blue Persian Gulf, and everywhere Sarah looked, she saw the juxtaposition of ultra-modern architecture with traditional Islamic design, golden domes beside glass towers, ancient wind towers preserved among contemporary structures. Khalid narrated the journey like a proud parent, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories, while Layla asked gentle questions about Sarah's flight and her grandson, Timothy. The warmth between father and daughter was palpable, and Sarah felt her anxiety beginning to ease. These weren't the cold, calculating strangers she'd half feared. They were simply people, dealing with pain and hope like everyone else. The Al-Rahman family home was not the ostentatious palace Sarah had half expected. Instead, it was an elegant villa in the prestigious Emirates Hills community, designed with understated luxury that spoke of wealth, but also of taste and comfort. Cream-colored stone walls were accented with intricate geometric patterns, and a central courtyard featured a tranquil fountain surrounded by date palms and fragrant jasmine. Inside, the decor blended modern minimalism with traditional Arabic elements, hand-woven carpets from Persia, contemporary art from local galleries, comfortable furniture that invited relaxation rather than intimidated. Sarah's suite was larger than her entire Oklahoma apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a pool and garden, an enormous bed with linens that felt like clouds, and a bathroom with fixtures that probably cost more than her car. Yet what touched her most was the personal thoughtfulness. Fresh flowers in her favorite colors. Somehow they'd learned she loved yellow roses. American coffee in the kitchenette, and a framed photograph of Timothy on the nightstand. Khalid must have found it on social media and had it printed and framed for her arrival. That first evening, Sarah met the rest of the household over a dinner that was a revelation to her Midwestern palate. The dining room table was laden with dishes she couldn't even name. Fragrant rice with saffron and nuts, tender lamb that melted on the tongue, fresh flatbread still warm from the oven, colorful salads with pomegranate seeds and fresh herbs, and sweets dripping with honey and rosewater. Khalid's mother, Fatima, a regal woman in her early 70s with snow-white hair and a sharp wit, welcomed Sarah in surprisingly good English, sharing stories of her own youth and making Sarah laugh with her dry observations about modern life. Little Hassan, an adorable toddler with his mother's dark eyes and his grandfather's smile, climbed into Sarah's lap without hesitation, apparently deciding immediately that this new person was trustworthy. As Sarah held the warm weight of the child, listening to the family's easy banter and feeling their genuine welcome, something tight in her chest began to loosen. Maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Maybe, somehow, this impossible situation might actually work. Sarah woke before dawn to the melodic call to prayer echoing across the city, a sound both foreign and strangely beautiful. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The silk sheets, the soft glow of ambient lighting, the warm breeze carrying jasmine through the partially open window were all so different from her threadbare apartment in Tulsa. Then memory flooded back, along with a surge of anxiety. What had she done? She was literally on the other side of the world, committed to living with strangers for 6 months, expected to somehow heal a grieving woman and support a surrogate through pregnancy. At 67, she'd taken the biggest gamble of her life. She reached for her phone and was relieved to find a message already waiting from Gladys, with photos of Timothy eating breakfast and getting ready for school, his gap-toothed smile filling the screen. "We miss you already, but we're fine," the text read. "Go do your magic, Sarah. That's what you do best." The household stirred early, Sarah discovered. By the time she'd showered and dressed in one of her modest dresses, she could hear activity throughout the villa. She made her way to the kitchen, following the scent of fresh coffee, and found Layla already there, sitting at the island counter with Hassan in a high chair beside her. The young woman looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting another sleepless night, but she brightened when she saw Sarah. "Good morning. I hope the call to prayer didn't startle you. I forget how it must sound to someone hearing it for the first time." Sarah poured herself coffee from the elaborate machine, declining Layla's offer to prepare traditional Arabic coffee, and settled onto a stool beside her hostess. "It was actually quite beautiful," she admitted. "Different from church bells, but serving the same purpose, I suppose, reminding us there's something bigger than our daily troubles." Layla's eyes filled with sudden tears. "That's a lovely way to see it. I'm afraid I haven't felt connected to anything bigger in quite some time." This was the moment Sarah recognized as pivotal. She could make polite conversation and keep things surface level, or she could do what Khalid had brought her here to do, engage with real empathy and honesty, drawing on decades of nursing experience, where she'd learned that sometimes patients needed to talk more than they needed medicine. Sarah reached out and gently covered Layla's hand with her own. "Your father told me some of your story, but I'd like to hear it from you, dear. Not right now, over coffee with Hassan needing attention, but maybe later today. I'm not here to judge or fix anything. I'm just here to listen and maybe share some of what I've learned from my own struggles." Layla looked at her with naked hope in her eyes, nodding slowly. "I think I'd like that very much. Father said you lost your daughter not long ago. I'm so sorry." Sarah felt the familiar ache, but managed to smile. "Thank you. Grief is strange. It never leaves, but somehow we learn to carry it. Maybe together we can figure out how to carry ours a little easier." Later that morning, Sarah met Amira for the first time. Khalid had arranged for the young woman to visit the villa, explaining that building trust early was essential for the surrogacy arrangement to work. Amira arrived precisely at 11, a petite woman of 28, with intelligent eyes and nervous energy that radiated from her like heat. She wore a simple abaya and shayla, and her hands twisted together constantly as she sat in Khalid's elegant study for the introduction. Through Khalid, who served as occasional translator when Amira's English faltered, Sarah learned that Amira was a distant cousin who'd fallen on hard times after her husband had abandoned her and their 2 children. The surrogacy payment would secure her children's education and future, but Amira was terrified of the medical procedures, of the judgment from extended family members, and most of all, of something going wrong with the pregnancy. Her own childbearing experiences had been traumatic, and the thought of going through it again, even with modern medical care, filled her with dread. Sarah recognized this fear intimately. She remembered her own pregnancy with Monica, the complications that had led to an emergency cesarean, the moments when she'd been certain she wouldn't survive to meet her daughter. "Amira," she said gently, leaning forward so their eyes met directly, "I'm not going to tell you there's nothing to be afraid of. That would be dishonest. Pregnancy and childbirth are profound experiences, and they come with real risks and challenges, even with the best medical care in the world. But let me tell you what. I learned as a labor and delivery nurse for 20 years. Fear is natural, but it doesn't have to be faced alone. If you'll let me, I'll be with you for every appointment, every checkup, every moment you need someone to hold your hand and remind you that you're stronger than you know. I may not be able to take away your fear, but I can promise you won't carry it by yourself." The transformation in Amira's face was immediate and profound. Her shoulders, which had been hunched with tension, slowly relaxed. The rapid twisting of her hands stilled. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled over, and she began speaking rapidly in Arabic to Khalid, who listened intently before translating with visible emotion. She says you're the answer to her prayers. She says she knew from the moment you spoke that you have a mother's heart, and that's what she needs most. Not just a medical professional, but someone who understands what it means to be afraid and to be brave at the same time. She wants to know if you'll truly promise to be there through all of it. Sarah didn't hesitate. She reached across the small space between their chairs and took both of Amira's hands in hers. I promise. Every single step of the way, I'll be right beside you. You're not just helping Layla's family, you're helping my grandson too. And that makes you family to me. We're in this together now. Amira squeezed her hands and nodded, and Sarah knew that the first real connection had been forged. That afternoon, while Hassan napped and Khalid attended business meetings, Layla invited Sarah to join her in the villa's garden. They settled on cushioned chairs beneath a pergola draped with flowering vines, the temperature perfect despite Dubai's reputation for heat. It was late November, and the weather was what Layla called glorious. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence, sipping mint tea and listening to birds singing in the carefully tended landscaping. Finally, Layla began to speak, her voice soft but steady, telling Sarah the story of her marriage to Rashid, a man she'd loved since university. He'd been charming, ambitious, and supportive of her career, rare qualities in their social circle, where many men still expected wives to abandon professional aspirations. For 5 years, their marriage had seemed ideal, a modern partnership that balanced tradition with progress. Then, Layla had gotten pregnant, and everything had changed in ways neither of them could have predicted. The pregnancy was difficult from the start, Layla continued, her fingers tracing patterns on the condensation of her tea glass. I had hyperemesis gravidarum, severe morning sickness that lasted all 9 months. I lost weight instead of gaining it. I couldn't work, couldn't function, could barely leave the bathroom. Rashid tried to be supportive at first, but I could see his frustration growing. His mother kept insisting I was exaggerating, that women had been having babies for millennia without such drama. When Hassan was finally born, I hemorrhaged severely. They had to perform an emergency hysterectomy to save my life. I was 29 years old, and just like that, my ability to have more children was gone. Her voice cracked, and she paused to compose herself. Rashid said he understood, that he was grateful I survived, that Hassan was enough. But within 6 months he was having an affair with a colleague. When I confronted him, he admitted that he'd always wanted a large family, that he felt cheated by my deficiency, as he called it. He left us shortly after Hassan's first birthday. Sarah listened with the practiced patience of someone who'd witnessed countless human sorrows, her heart aching for this young woman who'd lost so much, her health, her marriage, her dreams of the family she'd imagined. And the depression? She asked gently. Layla nodded, wiping her eyes with trembling fingers. It started after Hassan was born, but I thought it was just the trauma of the delivery. When Rashid left, it got so much worse. There were days I couldn't get out of bed, days when father had to care for Hassan, because I couldn't find the energy or will to do it myself. I felt like I'd failed at everything, as a wife, as a mother, as a woman. The doctors prescribe medication, which helps, but there's this emptiness inside me that nothing seems to fill. Hassan deserves siblings, deserves the big loving family I always imagined. I wanted to give him that, but my body betrayed me. Now I'm trying to create that family through surrogacy, and I feel like even that is somehow wrong, like I'm taking the easy way out instead of being a real mother. The pain in Layla's confession was so raw, so familiar to Sarah's own experiences of feeling inadequate and broken after Monica's death, that Sarah didn't hesitate. She set down her tea, moved her chair closer, and pulled Layla into an embrace, the kind of hug that said without words, I see you, I hear you, you're not alone. Listen to me, sweetheart, Sarah said firmly, holding the younger woman as she sobbed. You haven't failed at anything. You survived a life-threatening medical emergency and came through it with a beautiful son who needs his mother. Not a perfect woman, just you, exactly as you are. There's no easy way to build a family, and using a surrogate doesn't make you any less of a mother. What makes you a mother is love, is showing up every day even when it's hard, is wanting what's best for your child. You've got all of that in abundance. Now we just need to work on helping you see it in yourself. The days fell into a rhythm that surprised Sarah with its naturalness. Each morning, she woke to the call to prayer and spent quiet time with her coffee, watching the sun rise over Dubai's spectacular skyline while video calling Timothy before his bedtime. In Oklahoma, after breakfast with the family, she'd spend time with her son, reading him stories from American children's books she'd brought, teaching him simple English songs, and marveling at how children could communicate joy regardless of language barriers. The toddler had taken to calling her Nana Sarah, and the sound of his sweet voice saying her name never failed to make her smile. Mid-mornings were usually reserved for Layla, sometimes structured conversations where Sarah shared insights from her nursing career and motherhood experience, other times just companionable activities like gardening or cooking together, letting Layla lead the conversation where she needed it to go. Sarah was careful never to push, never to offer unsolicited advice, but rather to create space for Layla to process her grief and trauma at her own pace. Afternoons brought Amira, who visited 3 times a week for what had become a cherished ritual. Sarah would prepare tea. She'd learned to make traditional Arabic coffee now, though Amira preferred mint tea, and they'd talk about everything from serious medical concerns to light gossip about daily life. Amira's English was improving rapidly, and Sarah was picking up Arabic phrases, creating a hybrid language that was part vocabulary and part gesture, but always rich with understanding. They'd gone through all the preliminary medical appointments together, Sarah holding Amira's hand during blood draws and ultrasounds, explaining procedures in simple terms and offering constant reassurance. The fertility clinic staff had initially been skeptical of Sarah's role, but quickly recognized the value of having an experienced medical professional providing emotional support. Dr. Sharma, the lead fertility specialist, had privately told Khalid that Amira's anxiety levels had dropped dramatically since Sarah's involvement, which significantly improved the likelihood of a successful pregnancy. Evenings were Sarah's favorite time, when the whole household gathered for dinner. Fatima, Khalid's mother, had appointed herself Sarah's teacher in all things Emirati, from the proper way to prepare makbouz to the intricate social customs that governed family interactions. The elderly woman had a wicked sense of humor and loved to tell stories of Dubai's transformation from a modest trading port to the gleaming metropolis it had become, stories that stretched back to her own childhood when the city had no running water or electricity. Khalid himself was often busy with business obligations, but when he was present, he'd ask Sarah thoughtful questions about her observations and insights, truly valuing her perspective. Sarah found herself growing genuinely fond of this man who'd taken such an enormous risk bringing a stranger into his family. There was a loneliness in him that mirrored her own, the particular isolation of losing a beloved spouse and carrying on for the sake of children who needed stability. They'd begun having late-night conversations on the terrace, sharing stories of their lost loves, their fears for their children, their hopes for the future. The embryo transfer was scheduled for a crisp December morning, 3 weeks after Sarah's arrival in Dubai. The procedure itself would be quick and relatively simple, nothing like the surgeries and complications that Amira feared, but the emotional weight was enormous. This was the moment when possibility became reality, when the abstract plan crystallized into actual life beginning. Khalid had arranged for the entire family to be present at the clinic, wanting to honor Amira's courage and the profound gift she was offering. Sarah arrived early to spend time alone with Amira in the pre-procedure room. finding her awake but calm, her hands folded over the hospital gown she wore. "I had a dream last night," Amira said in her improving English, her eyes distant with memory. "I dreamed of a garden with two children playing, Hassan and his sister. They were laughing, and the sun was shining, and everything felt right. Like this is exactly what's meant to happen. Do you believe in signs, Nana Sarah?" Sarah considered the question carefully, drawing on a lifetime of faith, tested by tragedy, but never quite extinguished. "I believe that sometimes we get glimpses of what might be, little whispers of hope that help us through the hard parts. Whether that's God, the universe, or just our hearts trying to encourage us, I'm not always sure. But I do know this: you're doing something remarkably brave and generous today. And regardless of what happens, that's something to be proud of." She squeezed Amira's hand gently. "I also know that you're not alone in this. Layla is out in that waiting room pacing like an expectant father. Khalid has been driving the staff crazy with questions. Even Fatima came, and she never leaves the house for medical appointments. You've got an entire cheering section out there, dear girl, all of us praying and hoping right along with you." Amira's eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of gratitude. "I never expected to have a family again after my husband left, but somehow, through all of this, I've found one. You've all become my family." The procedure room was calm and professional, designed to reduce anxiety with soft lighting and peaceful colors. Dr. Sharma greeted them, both warmly, explaining each step before it happened, never rushing or dismissing Amira's concerns. Sarah stood beside the bed, holding Amira's hand throughout the process, maintaining eye contact and offering quiet reassurance. The actual transfer took less than 10 minutes, a thin catheter guided by ultrasound, a moment of pressure, then completion. "Perfect placement," Dr. Sharma announced with satisfaction. "Now we wait, rest, and think positive thoughts." In the recovery area. Afterward, Layla was allowed to come in briefly. She approached Amira's bedside with tears streaming down her face, holding a small gift box. "I don't have words adequate to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I want you to have this." Inside was an exquisite gold bracelet engraved with both Layla's name and Amira's, intertwined. "Whatever happens, we're connected now, you and I. Sisters of the heart." Amira began crying in earnest then, and Layla climbed carefully onto the bed beside her, and Sarah stepped back to give them privacy in their shared moment of hope and fear and possibility. The 2-week wait until the pregnancy test was an exercise in patience that tested everyone's nerves. Amira was supposed to rest and avoid stress, which was nearly impossible given the stakes. Sarah found herself falling into her old nursing routines, checking on Amira multiple times daily, monitoring for any concerning symptoms while trying not to hover like an anxious mother hen. They'd moved Amira into one of the villa's guest rooms for the duration, wanting her close for both practical and emotional support. The household rallied around her with touching devotion, Fatima preparing special nutritious meals believed to support early pregnancy, Hassan making crayon drawings to decorate Amira's room, Khalid ensuring she had everything she could possibly need. Layla was a bundle of nervous energy, alternating between hope and terror, unable to focus on work or anything beyond the ticking clock counting down to the test date. Sarah watched this family's dynamics with fascination and growing affection. In Oklahoma, she'd had neighbors and church friends, but the sense of true community had faded over the years, especially after James's death and Monica's increasingly busy life. Here, in this foreign place with people who'd been strangers weeks ago, she was experiencing something she'd nearly forgotten existed: the deep interconnection of people who treated each other's joys and sorrows as their own. It wasn't perfect. There were cultural misunderstandings and occasional awkward moments. Fatima's well-meaning attempts to find Sarah a nice widower to date were both hilarious and uncomfortable, and Sarah had to repeatedly explain that no, she wasn't interested in getting married again, and no, her life wasn't tragic just because she was alone. But beneath these minor friction points was genuine care, a sense that she mattered to these people, that her presence was valued for more than just the services she'd been hired to provide. Timothy's nightly video calls became a highlight for the entire household. The little boy, bless him, had adapted to his grandmother's absence with resilience that both proud and broke Sarah's heart. He'd tell her about school, about the new friend he'd made, about the science project he was working on with Gladys's help, but he'd also admit, in quiet moments, that he missed her hugs and her pancakes and the way she always knew how to make bad days better. "When are you coming home, Grandma?" he'd ask, and Sarah would explain again about helping a family, about the important work she was doing, about how this sacrifice now meant security for their future. What she didn't tell him was how she was beginning to think of Dubai as a second home, how the thought of leaving in 4 more months was starting to cause an ache she hadn't anticipated. She was falling in love with this family, with this city, with this unexpected chapter of her life, and she had no idea what that might mean for her future. The pregnancy test was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, exactly 14 days after the embryo transfer. Sarah had been awake since before dawn, too nervous to sleep, despite her usual pragmatic approach to medical matters. This felt different because it was different. This wasn't a patient she'd care for and then move on from. These were people who'd become woven into her heart. She helped Amira prepare for the clinic visit, both of them moving with the careful deliberation of people trying to delay a verdict that would either fulfill or crush their hopes. In the car, Khalid drove with uncharacteristic caution, while Layla sat in the back with Amira, holding her hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Sarah, in the passenger seat, found herself praying silently, not rehearsed prayers from her Methodist upbringing, but raw pleas from her heart. "Please, let this work. Let this be the beginning of something beautiful. Let this family have the healing they need." The clinic waiting room had never felt more oppressive despite its elegant design. Dr. Sharma kept them waiting only 15 minutes, a mercy given the circumstances, before calling them all into her office. Her expression was professionally neutral, giving nothing away, and Sarah's nursing instincts kicked in, cataloguing every micro-expression for clues. "I wanted to speak with everyone together," Dr. Sharma began, looking around at their anxious faces, "because what happens next affects you all, and you've approached this as a family unit, which I deeply respect." She turned to Amira, her expression softening into a smile. "Amira, congratulations. You're pregnant. The HCG levels are excellent, actually stronger than we typically see at this stage, which is very encouraging. We'll want to do an ultrasound in a few weeks to confirm viability, but right now, everything looks very promising." The room erupted in a chaos of emotion. Layla burst into tears. Khalid's face crumpled with relief. Amira covered her face with her hands and began to sob. And Sarah, practical Sarah, who'd seen thousands of pregnancies and prided herself on professional composure, found herself crying too, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of joy and relief and gratitude. The ride home was entirely different. From the tense journey to the clinic, everyone talked at once, making plans and dreaming aloud about the future. Khalid was already on the phone, arranging a celebration dinner. Layla couldn't stop thanking Amira, who kept insisting she hadn't done anything yet, and that the real challenge was still ahead. Sarah found herself laughing and wiping away tears simultaneously, marveling at how life could turn on a dime, how hope could survive even the darkest circumstances. Back at the villa, Fatima had somehow already heard the news. Khalid must have texted her from the car and had arranged a traditional celebration complete with Arabic sweets and a prayer of thanksgiving. Hassan, too young to understand what was happening, but sensing the joy, ran circles around the adults, laughing delightedly. As Sarah watched this family celebrate, she was struck by the profound realization that she'd been given a gift far greater than the $1 million. She'd been given purpose, connection, and the chance to be part of bringing new life and hope into the world. And somewhere in her heart, she knew that nothing in her life would ever be quite the same again. As December melted into January, Dubai's weather remained perfect, while Sarah's feelings grew increasingly complicated. The pregnancy was progressing beautifully. Amira had minimal morning sickness, and the early ultrasounds showed a strong heartbeat and healthy development. But something unexpected was happening that Sarah hadn't anticipated. She was falling in love with this life, these people, this place. What had begun as a financial arrangement had transformed into something far deeper and more complex. She found herself thinking less about her return to Oklahoma and more about what would happen when that inevitable day arrived. How could she leave Amira when the pregnancy still had months to go? How could she abandon Layla just when the younger woman was finally showing signs of healing, finally starting to believe in her own worth as a mother? How could she say goodbye to Hassan, who'd completely stolen her heart with his sticky kisses and demands for one more story, Nana? And then there was Khalid. Their late-night conversations on the terrace had become a ritual neither wanted to miss. They'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their marriages, their regrets and dreams, their fears about aging and irrelevance. Khalid was brilliant and kind, with a dry wit that surprised Sarah into laughter when she least expected it. He treated her not as an employee but as an equal, valuing her opinions on everything from business decisions to family matters. He'd begun teaching her Arabic in earnest, delighting in her terrible pronunciation, and she'd introduced him to American country music, which he found both fascinating and bewildering. "How can songs about trucks and beer be so emotional?" he'd asked once, genuinely perplexed, and she'd laughed until her sides hurt. But beneath the easy friendship, Sarah was increasingly aware of something else, an attraction she hadn't felt since James's death, a warmth in her chest when Khalid smiled, a disappointment on evenings when business kept him away. She was 67 years old, for heaven's sake. This was ridiculous. And yet, the crisis came on a humid January evening when Khalid found Sarah crying in the garden. She'd just finished a video call with Timothy, who'd broken down sobbing because he'd come in second in the school science fair and wanted his grandmother there to tell him it was okay. Gladys was wonderful, but she wasn't Nana. Sarah was torn between her love for her grandson and her growing attachment to this new life, guilt eating at her from both directions. Khalid sat beside her without asking permission, silent until her tears subsided. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle but serious. "Sarah, we need to talk about what happens when your 6 months are finished. You know as well as I do that your presence here has become about far more than the original arrangement. Amira won't deliver until late May. You'll be leaving just when she needs you most. Layla has made more progress in 3 months with you than in 2 years of therapy. Hassan asks about you first thing every morning. And he paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. I have come to value your presence in my life, in ways I hadn't anticipated." Sarah looked at Khalid through tear-blurred eyes, her heart hammering in a way that felt both wonderful and terrifying. "What are you saying, Khalid?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. He took a deep breath, his usual composure cracking slightly around the edges. "I'm saying that I'd like you to consider staying longer, not as an employee, but as family. We would sponsor an extended visa, of course, handle all the legal matters. You could stay through the birth, through Amira's recovery, through whatever time you need to feel that your work here is complete. Or," he hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation, "or you could stay permanently. I know that's an enormous thing to ask, that you have Timothy to consider, that your whole life is in America. But Sarah, in 3 months, you've become essential to this household in ways I can't adequately express. Amira trusts you completely. Layla sees you as the mother she needed. Hassan loves you. My mother adores you, though she'd never admit it so directly. And you?" Sarah prompted, her breath catching as she waited for his next words. Khalid reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and solid, and making her pulse race like a teenager's. "And I find myself happier than I've been in 5 years. You make me laugh, Sarah. You challenge my assumptions and call me out when I'm being foolish. You see me not as a wealthy businessman or the head of a family, but just as a man, flawed and sometimes lonely and trying his best. I'm not declaring undying love like some romantic movie. We're both too old and have lost too much to believe in fairy tales. But I am saying that what we have, this friendship, this understanding, this growing affection, is rare and precious. And I don't want to lose it just because an artificial deadline is approaching." Sarah felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the implications of what he was suggesting. Stay in Dubai? Make this strange new life permanent? What about Timothy? What about her little apartment in Tulsa, the church she'd attended for 40 years, her friends and familiar places? But even as the questions swirled, another voice in her head was whispering different truths. What was really waiting for her in Oklahoma, except an eviction notice she'd barely escaped, a nephew in Tulsa who visited once a year, acquaintances from church who drifted away after James's death? Timothy was her greatest concern, but Gladys had quietly mentioned in recent calls that the boy was thriving, making friends, excelling in school in ways he hadn't before. What if bringing him to Dubai, with its excellent schools and safe streets, might actually give him better opportunities? What if the life she'd been living wasn't the life she was meant to have, and God, or fate, or simple chance, had brought her halfway around the world to discover that? "I can't answer you tonight," she finally said, her voice shaking. "This is too big, too important. I need time to think, to pray, to figure out what's right for Timothy and for me." Khalid nodded, his expression understanding, but his eyes revealing his hope. "Of course, take all the time you need. Just know that whatever you decide, you'll always have a place here, always have a family here. That isn't conditional on anything except the simple fact that you've become one of us." Sarah spent a sleepless night wrestling with the biggest decision of her life. By dawn, she knew she needed to talk with Layla to understand how the younger woman truly felt about the possibility of Sarah staying permanently. It was one thing for Khalid to make the offer, quite another to know whether his daughter welcomed the idea or felt obligated by her father's wishes. She found Layla in the villa's small home office, working on architectural drawings for the first time in months, itself a sign of significant healing. "Do you have a minute?" Sarah asked from the doorway. Layla immediately set down her pencil and gestured to the comfortable chair beside her desk. "For you, always. What's on your mind?" The concern in her voice was genuine, and Sarah felt a rush of affection for this young woman who'd become like a daughter to her. "Your father spoke with me last night about the possibility of staying longer, potentially permanently. I need to know how you really feel about that, Layla, without any pressure to say what you think I want to hear or what would please your father." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. "I've grown to care deeply for all of you, but I won't stay if my presence has become a burden or if you need space to continue healing on your own terms." Layla's eyes widened with what looked like genuine alarm. "A burden? Sarah, you've been the answer to prayers I'd stopped praying. You've helped me see that depression isn't a moral failing, that needing help doesn't make me weak. You've shown me that there are different ways to be a good mother, that perfection isn't the goal. Presence is. Every day with you has been a step toward becoming the mother Hassan deserves and the person I want to be." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she made no move to wipe them away. "When I think about you leaving, I feel panic rising up. I know that's not fair to you, that you have your own life and family, but honestly, I'm not ready to do this without you yet." The rawness of Layla's admission touched Sarah profoundly. "And if I did stay, if I brought Timothy here to live with me, how would you feel about that? About having a child in the house who isn't family?" Layla's face broke into a radiant smile despite her tears. "Hassan would be thrilled. He talks about your grandson all the time, wants to meet him desperately. As for me, I think it would be wonderful. The whole point of the surrogacy was to give Hassan siblings and family, to not be alone. Your Timothy would be part of that. Different, yes, but no less valued. Besides," she added with a sly smile, "Grandmother Fatima would have 2 children to spoil instead of 1. She'd probably consider it an upgrade." The humor broke the tension, and both women laughed. Then Layla grew serious again. "Sarah, I see the way my father looks at you. I see the way you look at him, as your adopted daughter, if you'll allow me that presumption. I want you to know that I would be happy to see him happy again. He's been alone for so long, carrying all of us, never letting himself lean on anyone. You've changed that. You've changed all of us." The conversation with Timothy couldn't be delayed any longer. Sarah scheduled a video call during what would be morning in Dubai and evening in Tulsa, asking Gladys to be present for support. When her grandson's face appeared on the screen, Sarah felt the familiar tug of love and longing. He was growing so fast, his face losing its baby roundness, his eyes showing intelligence and perception beyond his 8 years. "Grandma, you look different," he said immediately. "You look, I don't know, happier?" Sarah smiled, touched by his observation. "I am happy, sweetie, but I need to talk with you about something very important, something that affects both of us." She took a deep breath and laid it all out. The family she'd come to love, Khalid's offer for her to stay permanently, the possibility of Timothy joining her in Dubai with excellent schools and new opportunities, but also the difficulty of leaving everything familiar behind. Timothy listened with the serious attention he gave to important matters, his young face thoughtful. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he surprised her. "Grandma, I miss you a lot, like a really, really lot. But I can tell you're doing something important there, something that makes you feel good. You haven't seemed this happy since Mom." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that reminded them both of their shared loss. "I've been thinking about it, about you being gone and everything. At first, I was just sad and wanted you to come home right away. But then Miss Gladys and I watched some videos about Dubai, and it looks really cool. And you're always talking about Khalid and Layla and Hassan, and I can tell you love them. So maybe," he paused, gathering courage, "maybe we should try it. Living there, I mean. It would be scary, but Mom always said that sometimes the scary things are worth doing. And I'd have you again, right? We'd be together." Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she listened to this child. Her child now, really, since Monica's death, displays such maturity and selflessness. "We would absolutely be together, Timothy, every single day. And I promise you, if you're unhappy, if it doesn't feel right, we can come back to Oklahoma. This isn't a permanent decision that can never be changed. It's a chance to try something new, to have an adventure together." Timothy nodded slowly, then a grin spread across his face. "Will I get to ride a camel? Because if we're moving to a desert, there should definitely be camels." Sarah laughed through her tears. "I'm sure we can arrange camel rides. Hassan will be so excited to meet you. He's been asking about you constantly. And there's a pool, and the beaches. Beautiful, and the schools are supposed to be excellent." Gladys, who'd been quietly present during the conversation, spoke up. "I think this is good for both of you, Sarah. New beginnings, fresh starts. You've earned this happiness." As the call ended, Sarah sat in her room feeling both terrified and exhilarated. This was really happening. She was going to stay. The next months passed in a flurry of activity and adjustment. The legal arrangements for Sarah's permanent residence in the UAE and Timothy's sponsorship proved surprisingly straightforward, given Khalid's connections and resources, though Sarah insisted on understanding every document she signed. Timothy arrived in late March during his spring break, wide-eyed with wonder at the gleaming airport and the spectacular city beyond. Hassan attached himself to Timothy immediately, following the older boy everywhere with devoted hero worship that was both adorable and occasionally exhausting. The two boys communicated in a hybrid of English, Arabic, and creative hand gestures, their friendship transcending language barriers with the ease of childhood. Watching them play in the pool together, or build elaborate Lego cities, or fall asleep during movie nights in a tangled pile of limbs, Sarah felt her heart might burst with gratitude. Amira's pregnancy progressed beautifully despite occasional scares that sent everyone into mild panic. At 20 weeks, the ultrasound revealed the baby was a girl, healthy, active, and measuring perfectly. Layla wept when she saw her daughter's image on the screen, the tiny profile and waving hands making everything suddenly real in a way it hadn't been before. "Mariam," she whispered, naming her daughter after her late mother, Khalid's wife. "We'll call her Mariam." The name choice moved Khalid to tears, and even Dr. Sharma had to excuse herself briefly to compose herself. Sarah held Amira's hand throughout, proud of how the younger woman had bloomed during pregnancy, growing in confidence as she realized her body was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, creating life and nurturing it with no complications or drama. They'd become true friends, sharing confidences and dreams during their daily tea times, planning for Amira's future after the birth, when the surrogacy payment would allow her to start fresh. As Amira's belly grew, so did Sarah's relationship with Khalid. It developed slowly, respectfully, with the careful consideration of two people who'd already lived full lives and lost great loves. They continued their evening conversations on the terrace, but now they held hands, and sometimes Khalid would put his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset. There were occasional kisses, sweet and tender rather than passionate, more about comfort and connection than desire, though Sarah found herself feeling butterflies she'd thought were long extinct. Fatima watched their growing closeness with satisfaction, having apparently decided early on that Sarah was perfect for her son. "You're good for him," she told Sarah bluntly one afternoon. "He's been alive, but not living since Mariam died. You've reminded him that life continues, that happiness is still possible. That's a great gift." Sarah accepted the compliment with grace, though she privately thought the gift went both ways. Khalid had reminded her of the same truths. The complications began in early May, when Amira was at 33 weeks gestation. She'd been feeling unwell all day, headaches, swelling in her hands and feet more severe than the normal pregnancy edema, vision changes that she'd initially dismissed as tiredness. Sarah, with her nursing instincts on high alert, took one look at Amira's puffy face and swollen ankles and immediately checked her blood pressure with the home monitoring kit they'd been using. The reading made her blood run cold. 165/105. Preeclampsia. Exactly the complication Sarah had feared most, given Amira's history and risk factors. She called Dr. Sharma immediately, who instructed them to come to the hospital right away. Within 2 hours, Amira was admitted to the maternal fetal medicine unit on magnesium sulfate to prevent seizures and being closely monitored for signs of deterioration. The baby, little Mariam, was showing some signs of stress, her heart rate patterns concerning enough that the medical team was discussing the possibility of early delivery. Layla was beside herself with anxiety and guilt. "This is my fault," she kept saying, pacing the hospital waiting room while Khalid tried unsuccessfully to calm her. "Amira is going through this danger because of me, because of my selfish need for another child. What if something happens to her? What if the baby—" Sarah cut her off firmly, taking her by the shoulders and forcing eye contact. "Stop. This is not your fault. Preeclampsia is a medical condition, not a punishment or karmic retribution." Amira knew the risks when she agreed to this, and she made her choice freely. "What she needs now is for you to be strong, to trust the excellent medical team taking care of her, and to focus all your energy on positive thoughts rather than guilt and catastrophic thinking. Can you do that?" Layla nodded, trying to steady her breathing, and Sarah pulled her into a hug. Over Layla's shoulder, she caught Khalid's eye. His expression was strained with worry, but also filled with gratitude for how she'd handled his daughter. They'd become a true team, she realized, partners in navigating this crisis as they'd become partners in so much else. The decision to deliver Mariam at 34 weeks was made after Amira's condition worsened overnight. It was earlier than anyone wanted, but the baby's lungs were developed enough with steroid support, and the alternative, waiting while Amira's blood pressure climbed despite maximum medication, was simply too dangerous. The cesarean section was scheduled for 7 a.m. Sarah was allowed in the operating room with Layla, both of them gowned and masked, standing near Amira's head, while the surgical team worked behind the blue drape. Amira was frightened but brave, squeezing Sarah's hand so hard it hurt, whispering prayers in Arabic. Then came the moment, a thin, angry cry from behind the drape, followed by Dr. Sharma's voice. "She's here! A beautiful girl!" The nurses whisked the baby to the warming table for assessment, and Sarah's experienced eye catalogued everything. Good color, strong cry, active movements, small at 4 pounds 2 ounces, but vigorous. The NICU team confirmed her evaluation. Baby Mariam was small but healthy, breathing on her own, no need for ventilation, just some monitoring and time to grow. Amira's recovery was complicated by the preeclampsia, requiring several days of continued medication and monitoring, but she improved steadily. The relationship between Amira and Layla deepened into something beautiful during those hospital days. Layla would sit beside Amira's bed for hours, talking quietly, showing her photos of Mariam in the NICU, including Amira in every decision about the baby's care. When Amira was finally well enough to be wheeled to the NICU to see Mariam for the first time, her tears were a complex mix of joy, love, and the bittersweet knowledge that this child she'd carried for 8 months would never be hers. Layla seemed to understand this intuitively. "She's your niece," Layla said firmly. "Not in some legal paperwork sense, but in the true sense. She's family. You'll watch her grow up, be part of her life, help shape who she becomes. That connection doesn't end just because the pregnancy is over." Amira nodded, unable to speak through her tears, and Sarah, standing quietly in the corner of the NICU, marveled at how love could multiply and expand to include people who'd started as strangers. 3 weeks later, little Mariam was discharged from the hospital, a tiny but healthy 5-pound bundle who immediately owned everyone's hearts. The villa transformed into a chaos of baby equipment and sleepless nights, but it was a joyful chaos. Layla proved to be a capable and confident mother, all her earlier doubts and depression seemingly banished by the reality of her daughter in her arms. She still had hard days. Depression doesn't disappear overnight, but the trajectory was clearly upward. Amira visited daily, always welcomed, her own children now integrated into the extended family and playing with Hassan and Timothy as if they'd always known each other. Sarah watched this blended, unconventional family with awe, thinking about how none of this would have existed if she hadn't taken that terrifying leap of faith and responded to an email that seemed too good to be true. All these people, all this love and connection and joy, it had started with her saying yes to the impossible. On a warm June evening, as the household was finally settling into a new routine, Khalid asked Sarah to join him for a walk in the garden. They strolled in comfortable silence for several minutes before he stopped beside the fountain where they'd first talked privately months ago. "I have something I want to ask you," he said, his voice slightly nervous in a way that was endearing from such a usually composed man. "Not a proposal in the traditional sense. We're both too old and have been married too well to think we need to replicate what we had before. But I want to make our relationship official, to bind our lives together formally, whether through marriage or some other legal arrangement that feels right to you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're part of my life permanently, not just as a guest or friend, but as my partner." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Sarah, not the desperate, consuming love of youth, but something steadier and perhaps deeper, the love of someone who knows life is precious and short and meant to be shared with people who make us better. Will you marry me, or whatever version of commitment feels right to your heart?" Sarah said yes, of course. How could she not when this man had given her back her life and her purpose? They married in a small, intimate ceremony that blended traditions from both their cultures, a Muslim cleric and a Methodist minister, co-officiating, vows spoken in English and Arabic, readings from both the Quran and the Bible. Layla served as Sarah's matron of honor, tears streaming down her face throughout the ceremony. Timothy and Hassan were ring-bearers, taking their duties with adorable seriousness. Amira attended with her children, wearing a beautiful dress Layla had insisted on buying for her, and Fatima, who'd orchestrated much of the celebration behind the scenes, watched with satisfaction as her son married a woman she'd known from the first meeting was exactly right for him. The reception was held in the villa's garden, transformed into a fairy tale setting, with thousands of tiny lights and flowers from both Oklahoma and the UAE, a physical representation of 2 lives, 2 worlds coming together. The year that followed brought changes and growth for everyone. Layla returned to work part-time, designing a community center for Dubai that incorporated sustainable elements and won international recognition. Amira used her surrogacy payment to complete a degree in early childhood education and opened a small daycare center, which quickly developed a reputation for excellence and earned steady income. She'd begun dating a kind man who owned a bookshop, and Sarah felt maternal pride watching Amira bloom into confidence and happiness. Hassan and Timothy became inseparable, bilingual brothers in all but blood, their friendship the foundation of their blended family. Little Mariam thrived, already showing signs of being as strong-willed as her mother and as intelligent as her grandfather. And Timothy, brave, resilient Timothy had adapted to Dubai life better than Sarah had dared hope, excelling in his international school and making friends from a dozen different countries. As for Sarah herself, she sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was her life now. At 68 years old, she'd remarried, gained a daughter and multiple grandchildren, found a whole new family and purpose, and discovered that endings could also be beginnings if you were brave enough to embrace the unexpected. The $1 million Khalid had originally promised had been deposited in a trust for Timothy's education and future. Sarah had insisted she didn't need it, that she had something far more valuable. But Khalid had insisted right back that a promise was a promise, and the money was hers regardless. She donated half to a nursing scholarship fund in Monica's name, and the rest sat earning interest for Timothy's college years. Money had brought her to Dubai, but love, in all its forms, had made her stay. And every evening, sitting on the terrace with Khalid, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, while children's laughter echoed from inside the house, Sarah gave thanks for the mysterious paths that had led her here, to this impossible, beautiful, perfectly imperfect life. Sometimes, she thought, the greatest adventures begin not with a plan, but with a leap of faith and a heart willing to be surprised by joy.